Warning, some viewers may be too lame to enjoy the following information.
The coaster that breaks every height and speed barrier is here. Top Thrill Dragster. It's the fastest at 0 to 120 miles per hour in 4 seconds. It's the tallest at 420 feet. The first and only strata coaster on Earth is now open. Cedar Point's 16th coaster, Top Thrill Dragster. Wanna go? Got the guts. Cedar Point, absolutely amazing.
Well, it used to be the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster in 2003. Now it's just the tallest and fastest in Ohio, if that matters. Well, I guess it does, since Ohio seems to be the unofficial roller coaster capital of the United States, besides Florida or California. Now, even though Top Thrill Dragster is not the tallest or fastest roller coaster anymore, its stats still don't disappoint. The ride stands 420 feet tall and reaches speeds of 120 miles per hour in just 3.8 seconds. This video will mark the first official episode of my new series, Problematic Roller Coasters. I have added my 2 prior videos about Mr. Freeze and Batman and Robin the Chiller to the series as well. Be sure to check out those videos after this one if you haven't already. When Top Thrill Dragster opened, it featured very revolutionary roller coaster technology. Its hydraulic launch system was so ahead of its time that the ride's manufacturer, Intamin Amusement Rides, actually discontinued the model altogether. With this revolutionary launch system came lots of technical hiccups that still affect the ride's performance to this day. In this video, we will be discussing Top Thrill Dragster's ride experience, as well as some of its technical flaws. Top Thrill Dragster is a very complex ride, and I often find that many coaster enthusiasts seem to misunderstand how the ride truly works. So I'll try to address all those aspects in this video. Let's dig in. Top Thrill Dragster was absolutely mind-boggling when it opened in 2003. At this point in time, the roller coaster wars were still in full swing. Parks continuously tried to build bigger and better record-breaking roller coasters each and every year. Cedar Point had already built several world's tallest and fastest roller coasters. The park had opened Millennium Force, which debuted as the world's tallest and fastest full-circuit roller coaster just a few years prior in 2000. While Millennium was certainly jaw-dropping when it opened, it wasn't technically the world's tallest or fastest roller coaster, as Superman the Escape at Six Flags Magic Mountain stood taller and traveled 7 miles per hour faster than Millennium. Well, in 2003, Cedar Point truly took the height and speed record when they opened Top Thrill Dragster, which stood 5 feet taller than Superman the Escape and traveled 20 miles per hour faster. And on top of that, it was a full circuit roller coaster, while Superman was only a shuttle roller coaster. The ride is themed to a top fuel dragster, which famously accelerates at very high speeds in very short periods of time. The only difference is that Top Thrill Dragster accelerates into a 420 foot tall vertical top hat, while a traditional top fuel dragster slams on the brakes after hitting top speed. The placement of the ride is perfect as well, directly in the center of the park. Guests are able to walk alongside the ride's launch track and watch train after train accelerate to speeds of 120 miles per hour. The overall theme and placement of the ride is miles better than Kingda Ka, a very similar roller coaster that operates at Six Flags Great Adventure, which stole dragster's height and speed records in 2005. Because of Kingda Ka, Cedar Point no longer advertises dragster as the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster, but as the original strata roller coaster. Strata roller coasters are rides between the height of 400 and 499 feet tall. But I'm not really sure if dragster is the original strata, as Superman the Escape broke 400 feet in 1996, but oh well, dragster's the better ride. Riders enter the ride's queue line, which begins directly under the ride's launch track. The queue line is a maze of concrete switchbacks that sits directly between the ride's launch and brake run. The queue line features little theming, but the station building is really nice. Riders board into one of the 6 trains featured on the ride, but the ride only operates 5 trains at most. I'll get more into that later in the video, as I know exactly why that is. You're listening to a former ride operator of Top Thrill Dragster. The ride features a very similar seat and restraint system to Millennium Force. A seatbelt and a T-bar styled lap bar hold riders into the train. This leads to a very open experience, which I find is one of the ride's best features. 2 trains at a time are dispatched from the load station to improve the attraction's hourly rider capacity. Both trains then enter the launch area. The park has an audio system that plays sound effects of dragster engines idling and revving as the trains prepare to launch. Once it's your turn to launch, your train begins to roll backwards a few inches as the hundreds of brake fins that line the launch track drop. After a brief moment, the train begins accelerating down the launch track. Top Thrill Dragster's launch is a rare experience for people to accelerate that quickly in such a short amount of time. The ride hits 120 miles per hour in just 3.8 seconds, an acceleration that not even some of the world's best cars are capable of. Now, a real top fuel dragster will hit speeds of over 300 miles per hour in just about the same amount of time, but I still think Top Thrill Dragster nails it. If you really want to experience something like an actual top fuel dragster, try out Dododompa in Japan, which accelerates from 0 to 112 miles per hour in just 1.6 seconds. I've actually ridden Dododompa, and call me crazy, but I still prefer dragsters launch to Dododompa's. Dododompa is certainly more intense, but it's also so short that you basically can't even comprehend what just happened. Whereas Dragster gives you just enough time to process everything and to really appreciate what it's doing to your body. Anyways, Dragster finishes accelerating and reaches its top speed of 120 miles per hour. If you're sitting in the front rows, the wind hurtling at your face is absolutely crazy. The speed just feels so insane. The ride continues down the straight track for another brief moment of time and then begins to ascend the tower. I love pulling up into the tower as riders are slammed with a good dose of positive G-forces. Even though the radius of the pullout is probably 200 feet, the train is traveling so fast that the G-forces are unavoidable. The train is now traveling upwards at 90 degrees as it rotates counterclockwise 90 degrees. The train begins to crest over the top of the 420-foot tall top hat. If you're sitting in the front of the train, you'll receive a good dose of airtime here. Depending on how fast the ride is running, the train will either fly over the top or crawl over the top. The ride is programmed so that it crests the top hat at just a few miles per hour. If you're lucky, the ride will not make it over the top hat and will come flying back down the tower in what is called a rollback. The train begins falling at a 90-degree angle back towards the ground and rotates through a 270-degree clockwise heartline roll. The roll is quick and rotates faster and faster as the train accelerates towards the ground. If you're sitting in the back rows, the airtime from the drop continues all the way through the spiral, making this one of the craziest drops ever. The ride completes the roll and hits a tight pullout, where the train levels back out and delivers some strong positive G-forces. The train continues to hurtle down a straight section of track at very high speeds and then crosses the finish line, where the train hits a very long magnetic brake run that safely and smoothly brings the train to a stop. Overall, Top Thrill Dragster has to be one of the most shocking, shortest coasters ever. While its height and speed are no joke, the ride is laughably short, and most kiddie roller coasters offer a longer ride experience. But few roller coasters offer the crazy height and speed that Dragster does. Dragster already cost so much money to build that making it any longer would have just made it even more expensive. Top Thrill Dragster is a favorite ride amongst many roller coaster fans and is absolutely one of the better coasters at Cedar Point. Now, it's not my favorite roller coaster at the park, and I don't rank the coaster extremely high on my favorite roller coasters overall, but it's a must-ride attraction that truly rivals the experience delivered by more traditional roller coasters. Now let's dig into the more technical side of the video. The complexity of Top Thrill Dragster absolutely comes at a cost, and that cost is downtime. Dragster spends a good amount of its time closed, rather than operating. This is due to the number of additional sensors and components that the ride must use in order to monitor itself. For instance, each of the ride's brake fins possess 2 sensors that monitor and control the position of each brake fin, and there are hundreds of brake fins that line the launch track, which means even more sensors. If any one of those sensors stops working, the computer will catch an error and the ride can shut down. Because of this, Dragster has a higher chance of closing than a ride that possesses far less sensors. So whenever you see the ride closed, it's often for small hiccups like such, as the system that runs Dragster is very safe and very complex. But I think this is more common knowledge, so let's dig in deeper to the misunderstandings that many seem to have with the ride. Something that most people seem to get backwards about Top Thrill Dragster is that empty trains actually require more speed to clear the tower than fully loaded trains do. Now, this is due to physics. The launch motors are strong enough to launch trains to the same exact speed regardless if they're loaded with riders or not, but a heavier train will carry more momentum up the tower and slow down less than an empty train which carries less momentum. It's the same reason why parks will load water dummies into trains during cold morning test runs. Heavier trains carry more momentum through the layout, which makes completing the course more likely. So the same concept applies to Top Thrill Dragster, as the launch system will get the train up to speed regardless if it's loaded with riders or not. During morning test runs, the launch is basically calibrated to accelerate empty trains up and over the tower. Because empty trains require more speed to clear the tower, the first test run of the day will often roll back. Simply put, this causes the computer to increase the launch speed to account for empty trains. When the ride opens in the morning, it is very common for operators to only load the first 3 cars of the train. Many people often assume that this is to help the ride warm up, or so that the launch motor can work its way up to launching trains faster and faster to account for additional weight, but in reality, the exact opposite is happening. The process of loading more and more rows on Top Thrill Dragster is a part of speed reduction. Basically, the park cannot load a train fully when the computer is adjusted to launch empty trains over the tower, as the train would fly over the tower too fast and could possibly overshoot the final brake run, which will cause a computer fault and shut down the ride. So the park has to gradually load more and more riders onto the trains to gradually bring down the speed of the launch. And this process takes time, as the computer can only slowly adjust the launch speed between each cycle. The way the ride adjusts its launch speed is by timing how long it takes a train from when it begins launching to when the train crests the tower. I can't remember the exact time, but I believe the computer likes to keep this to around 7.5 seconds. The computer will make micro adjustments to keep this time exactly the same, or as close to it as it can. As the ride reduces its launch speed, operators will begin loading more and more rows. This is because the launch speed is now low enough to allow a fully loaded train to crest the tower with proper timing. Now, if operators were to suddenly launch an empty train at this point, it would most likely roll back, as the launch speed is reduced to a point where trains require weight to crest the tower. To counteract this, Dragster has a function called Empty Train Enable, which basically will give an empty train an additional boost of speed so that it clears the tower. This function can only be used when a train is empty, as a fully loaded train would fly over the tower far too fast. So don't ask a ride operator to turn this on, as the answer will be a firm no, and you will most likely annoy the ride operator and they will staple your lap bar closed. Another misunderstood idea with Thrill Dragster is why it only runs 5 out of its 6 trains. When Dragster was originally being designed, it was actually supposed to feature a longer launch track. The launch track would have continued over the midway near Magnum XL 200, and the top hat would be where Gemini stands today. This would have required the removal of Gemini altogether. However, Intamin was able to shorten the launch track by a considerable amount, which leaves us with the Dragster we have today. This also meant that the brake run was shortened. As a result, the brake run ended up featuring a design flaw that effectively makes one of the ride's block zones useless. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a block zone is a segment of track that only one train may occupy at a time. At the end of a block zone is a method to stop a train, to prevent it from moving forward into the next block if the block ahead is occupied. This is the safety system that keeps roller coaster trains from colliding with each other. Thrill Dragster was designed to have 9 block sections. The block segments are as follows: Unload Station 2, Unload Station 1, Load Station 2, Load Station 1, the Transfer Track, the Launch Track, the Brake Run, Hold Brake 2, and Hold Brake 1. Together, these block sections would safely and efficiently allow Dragster to run 6 trains. However, because the final brake run was shortened, an issue exists with where trains come to a full stop in certain scenarios. Dragster actually features the same design flaw that Millennium Force does, where the brake run is too flat and features fixed magnetic brake fins that do not adjust to allow slow trains to pass through freely. Empty trains will come to a near stop much earlier than a fully loaded train will. But as an upgrade over Millennium Force, Intamin added tire drives earlier in the brake run to aid slow trains as they creep through the magnetic fins. To account for all scenarios, these tires are not fixed in the upward position, and their default is the lowered position, where they do not come in contact with the train. This way, when trains are running fast and fly through this portion of the brake run, the trains do not drag against the tires, which would likely cause damage to the trains and tire drive systems. The tires only prop up once the train is slowed down to acceptable speeds. The later portion of the final brake run also features adjustable brake fins, which do lower to allow trains to pass through freely once trains have slowed to an acceptable speed. Now, in order for a train to come to a full stop on Dragster, the train must come in contact with the tire drive, as the magnetic brakes are not capable of fully stopping the train. And the final brake run is sloped downwards just slightly and doesn't become flat until the Hold 2 block. This way, trains can always creep forward through the final brake run, even if the adjustable brakes fail to lower and if the adjustable tire drives fail to raise. This typically only happens whenever the ride has a computer error. The issue with the final brake run is that it does not possess any tire drives that are always fixed in the upward position. Every single tire drive before the hold blocks is adjustable. Now, this doesn't cause any issues when the ride is operating normally, as the tires will always raise to catch a train and stop it if necessary. But when the ride has an error or breaks down, the computer system will automatically put the brake fins and tire drives into their default positions. This means the adjustable brake fins lock in the upwards position, which slows trains, and the adjustable tire drives on the final brake run lock in the downward position, which means they do not come in contact with the train. When the tire drives are unable to come in contact with the train, trains will continue to crawl through the final brake run without stopping. Thus, the final brake run is incapable of actually stopping a train, and a train will come to a stop in Hold 2. Because of this, the ride was reprogrammed to combine the main brake and Hold 2 positions into one block zone, which dropped the number of block zones from 9 to 8 whenever the ride is placed in automatic mode. This is the only mode that guests are allowed to ride in. Now, 8 blocks still allows the ride to safely run all 6 trains, but the elimination of that 9th block just means that 6 trains becomes very slow. Let me give you a scenario. The ride has all 6 trains stacked. This means we have 2 trains in the load platform, 2 trains in the unload station, and 2 trains in the hold brakes. The ride features multi-move, or rolling blocks, but it's not the same multi-move that Millennium Force features, where every single train seems to move at the same time. Instead, trains begin moving one by one, but the block ahead doesn't have to completely clear for the next train to begin motion. Because trains don't move completely simultaneously on Thrill Dragster, this means it takes quite a bit of time for every single train to move forward. Now, when the ride has 9 blocks, once the first train moves into the launch position, the main brake block, which is directly ahead, is unoccupied. So the train is able to launch right away without any holdups. But when that main brake block disappears, the next block zone is now technically hold 2. Since the train that moves into the launch track was the first train to begin movement, that means it will reach the launch track way before the train in hold 2 begins moving forward, as the train sitting in hold 2 is the last train to begin motion. This causes the train to sit on the launch track, wasting time while the trains ahead move forward to empty block zones. So instead, the park chooses to run 5 trains. This way, hold 2 is always open, as only hold 1 will be occupied. This means that when a train reaches the launch track, it can now launch right away. This actually leads to a higher hourly capacity than if the park continued to run 6 trains. And just to reiterate, 6 train operations is still absolutely possible and is not a safety risk, but the park chooses to run 5 trains due to the elimination of a block zone, which makes 5 trains more efficient. Now there are drawbacks to only running 5 out of 6 trains. Dragster is unique in that in order to dispatch, there are 4 trains that must be ready to move all at once. This would be the 2 trains in the load station and the 2 trains in the unload station. So the 2 trains in the load station must be fully loaded and ready to dispatch, and the 2 trains in the unload station must be fully unloaded and ready to advance forward. When the ride runs 6 trains, the 2 trains in the load station are dispatched into the ride. The 2 trains in the unload station advance directly into the load station, and the 2 trains from the hold positions move forward into the unload station. This means that both trains in the unload station have a fairly equal amount of time to unload. But when the ride only runs 5 trains, the situation is very different. 2 trains will dispatch from the load station and advance forward. The 2 trains in the unload station advance into the load station, and only 1 train from the hold break advances into the unload station because the 6th train is on the transfer track. This means that unload station 2 is unoccupied and is awaiting arrival of a train to unload. And the train it's waiting on to arrive is the one sitting in the launch position. That train will launch and begin heading towards the unload station. This train will then park and unload 2 as the train behind it begins its launch sequence. Remember that 2 trains are dispatched at a time. In order for operators to continue to operate the ride at optimal capacity, they must dispatch the next set of trains before the train that just launched stacks behind the train in unload 2. But because the train in unload 2 must first unload all riders before it can advance forward, this causes a delay for the 3 trains ahead of it, which had ample time to load or unload. Oftentimes, ride operators will rush riders off the train in unload 2 so that they are able to dispatch the next pair of trains. If you are ever rushed off the ride once you return to the unload station, this is why. The ride attendants must then wait for all 18 of those guests to leave the unload platform entirely, and the exit gates must be shut. Only then are operators able to give an all clear to dispatch the next pair of trains. The train that parks in unload 2 has such little time to complete the unload process because of 5 train operations. Whereas with 6 train operations, the train in unload 2 would have ample time to unload, like the train does in unload 1. But running 5 trains is still more efficient, as it allows block zones to empty faster so that trains can launch more often. Plus, it always means the ride has a spare train available if one of the trains has an issue midday. Earlier in Dragster's career, this drawback was less of an issue, as ride attendants were allowed to start the dispatch sequence, while riders leaving the train in unload 2 were still on the platform but behind the red line. But over the years, this policy is adjusted and now requires that all riders are completely off the platform before the dispatch sequence can begin. Before I worked Top Thrill Dragster, I always wondered why it only ran 5 out of its 6 trains, but working the coaster showed me exactly why this is. I highly recommend that all fans of roller coasters or fans of amusement parks try working at one. There is a lot to learn that you simply can't as just an enthusiast, and seeing things from behind the scenes is really cool. I absolutely miss my days as a ride operator, and I hope to one day operate another. Try applying to your local amusement park. Or I highly recommend Cedar Point if you're a college kid looking for a summer job that's away from home. Let's dig into another topic. I can make this video as long as I want, and I think you guys have time to watch right now. Swapping out Top Thrill Dragster's launch system with another more reliable method seems to be a common discussion amongst roller coaster enthusiasts. Many often speculate the replacement of Top Thrill Dragster's complex hydraulic launching system with a magnetic one. However, this isn't possible because of Dragster's short launch track. Magnets are not capable of accelerating a train to such high speeds in the little space that a hydraulic launch can. Additionally, magnets would not be capable of launching Dragster's 5-car trains at the speed either. Let's take a look at another Intamin roller coaster for example. Red Force is an Intamin launching roller coaster at Flaharty Land at the Portaventura Resort in Spain. The ride uses linear synchronous motors to accelerate trains from 0 to 112 miles per hour in 5 seconds. Because of the magnetic motors, the ride requires a much longer launch track. If the same magnetic system were placed onto Top Thrill Dragster, trains wouldn't launch to nearly the same speed they do now. As a result, the 420-foot tall top hat would need to be shortened considerably, or the top hat would have to be pushed back further, back where Gemini stands now, and the launch track would have to be extended over the midway near Magnum XL 200. Additionally, the trims would most likely need to be shortened from 3 cars to 5 cars, as there's no way the magnetic motors would deliver enough power for a full 5-car train. As things currently stand, Dragster is capable of launching 60 trains an hour at most. Each train has 9 rows and holds 18 riders each. That equates to an hourly rider capacity of 1,080 riders. Now, if Dragster's trains were cut down to 3 cars, this means that the ride would only have 5 rows, since the first car only has 1 row. This means that each train would only hold 10 riders, and the hourly capacity would drop to 600 riders per hour. If Cedar Point is truly looking for a method to improve the reliability of Dragster's launch system, I think they would be better off keeping the hydraulic launch and reducing the trains from 5 cars to 4 cars each. Each car of the train weighs 1 ton or 2,000 pounds, and this would help to lighten the load on the hydraulic launch motors, which could increase reliability. Dragster actually temporarily ran like this during the 2003 season before the ride officially opened to the public. This move would also drop each train's capacity to having 7 rows, or 14 riders each. In effect, the ride's capacity would drop from 1,080 riders an hour to 840, which is much better than 600. Dragster is still a very popular ride and needs all the capacity it can get while operating. Now, a compressed air launch may also work on Top Thrill Dragster, as air launches can accelerate trains to speeds in even less distance than a hydraulic launch can, but I doubt the system would be much more reliable than the hydraulic system is now. Dododonpa at Fuji-Q Highland uses a compressed air launch, and from what I saw, it's not the most reliable coaster. And the number of cars per train would still have to be reduced as well for Dragster. Not to mention, retrofitting the launch would cost a lot of money that the park already puts into Top Thrill Dragster year after year, so I wouldn't expect the hydraulic launch to go anywhere anytime soon. So if the park decides to get rid of the hydraulic launch, this would mean that they're probably getting rid of the entire ride, which I don't see happening yet. This will conclude my review and analysis of Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point in Ohio. I didn't go into the specifics of how the launch system itself works, as there are already videos that perfectly explain that on YouTube. The goal of this video is to touch more on the operational side of the ride that most people are not familiar with. I hope you found the information enjoyable, and feel free to discuss it in the comments below. And also be sure to tell me what you think of Top Thrill Dragster. I find that the ride is one of the coolest coasters out there, and I love how complex of an attraction it is. It's actually my favorite ride to work at, and I've operated a ton of different rides and coasters in my lifetime. Be sure to check out the ElToroRyan merch store for all your clothing needs, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Comment down below which ride you'd like me to do next. Thanks for watching, everyone. Peace.